Thank you everyone for joining. We'll get started in just a minute. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Olivia, and I'd like to thank you for attending today's webcast. Today we'll be presenting Why is Endpoint Detection and Response Replacing Antivirus and Security Information and Event Management, which will be led by Paul Truitt and Neil Christie. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. First, we encourage you to ask questions. To do so, please send them to us using the Q&A box on the lower left-hand side of your screen. We will try to answer all of your questions during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or if we run out of time, your question will be answered later via email. Second, to earn the available 1 CPE credit during today's webcast, you must listen to at least 50 minutes of the presentation and answer at least 3 polling questions. Please note that you must be logged in individually to receive credit for today's webcast. If you are attending as a group, only the individual who is logged in will receive credit. If you have completed the requirements, your certificate will be available for download at the end of the webcast. I'll walk through how to download your certificate after the presentation has concluded, so please stay on the line. Lastly, you can download a copy of today's presentation from the green Resource List button at the bottom of your screen. Here, you will also find our webcast Frequently Asked Questions, a document which offers some basic troubleshooting information and other useful tips. Again, this can be found under the green Resource List button at the bottom of your screen. Now, thank you once again for joining. I'll hand it over to Paul.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to talk today a little bit about endpoint technology. We're going to talk about how that affects EDR, what is MDR, what is SIEM and SOC, and how XDR may be the future. We're going to spend a good bit of time on a lot of these terms. We're actually going to walk through some of the definitions because there's a little bit of confusion. A lot of different organizations and vendors may use some of these terms a little bit differently. So we'll kind of jump in. I think our first item is a polling question. I know those are very exciting. So the question is, are EDR and antivirus the same? So we'll go ahead and fill those in. I'll wait for just a minute while we get some responses back. And just to remind you, you do need to do 3 out of 4 of these in order to make sure you get your CPE credits.
And just to chime in to fill a little bit of the void here, Paul, I'm hoping, and this is Neil here, so thanks for having me join in. But this seems like an obvious question, but it's it's important to kind of set the stage as to some of the conversation we'll lead into. So please, give us your honest feedback, and we'll try and gauge the conversation to the audience as best we can. So appreciate the feedback.
Thanks, Neil.
And hopefully you guys learned some stuff today.
Thank you, Neil, for filling the void for us. We've still got only 68%. We're getting there. And I think we did somewhat skip the introduction slide with our names and information. We'll make sure we share some of that at the end. So again, my name is Paul Truitt. I'm the practice leader for cybersecurity at Mazars, and the friendly voice you heard just a second ago is Neil Christie, who is a sales engineer with CyberReason. Both of us work quite closely together to help deliver cyber services to our clients. So I think we're at 75% here. That's probably good. We'll go ahead and shift forward up 78%. If I wait another second. All right, we're going to move on. So 100% answer of yes. That was hopefully a gimme for everyone. I hope everyone recognizes that EDR and antivirus are not the same. And we're going to go through a little bit around the evolution of endpoint technology here in just a minute to give you some more details about why they're not the same. But before we start, I think it's always worth grounding ourselves with some key terms. And looking at some of these technologies, while these three-letter or four-letter words sometimes get misused or used interchangeably, they are not necessarily interchangeable. So antivirus, been around since, I think what we showed on our evolution slide, since about 1987. Very old technology, has morphed a bit over the years, but not a ton. Obviously, they update signatures, so they do recognize newer virus-related signatures. But in reality, the only way antivirus works is it's a known bad activity, known signature of some kind of a virus that's already designed and has been out in the wild, and they will stop that type of activity. Technologies like McAfee, Norton, Symantec, I might be using old terms. They might have been acquired at this point, but those technologies you've likely paid for on different endpoint machines over the years. SIEM technology, security information and event management, is centralized log collection. So something much more advanced than something like a syslog engine, but tying multiple data sources together. So thinking of something like your firewalls and your antivirus and your EDR and your server event logs all feeding into one platform. That platform is able to do analysis, correlation, create dashboards, provide alerts, and that's really what's typically happening when you think of an MSSP, a managed security services provider, behind the scenes providing a monitoring service for you. They're typically using a SIEM technology in order to aggregate that data up from your environment and be able to perform alert and response. EDR is, to an extent, the next generation of endpoint technology or antivirus, and an EDR technology. And by the way, we're going to dive much deeper into each of these, so you don't have to memorize or take any notes here if anybody was. EDR is a piece of technology that allows you to do reactionary response in the event something is happening. Things like isolating a host or gathering forensic information from the endpoint. It gives that bidirectional communication between your security analyst and the security analyst's platform with your endpoints. It's also giving you a much better contextual knowledge around what might be happening. So many EDR consoles allow you to see something along the lines of, if we have a ransomware event underway, we might be able to see where that initial virus or malware started, where it migrated. We can see those signatures match or some of the activities match, and we might be able to build a picture in there to show where that malicious activity is moving inside of the environment and where to be able to close off the door that was opened up in order to gain access into your environment. MDR is the management and monitoring that sits on top of EDR. And so that's typically a third party providing MDR services. Many times it's the either EDR vendor or it may be a third party like a Mazars providing that service surrounding the EDR technology, as well as monitoring response and taking action 24 hours a day. And then XDR, which is really where we're going to talk quite a bit in this presentation, is the extension of the EDR MDR service. And what I typically describe XDR as is the merge between what was historically done on the SIEM platform or the security operations platform mixed with what was happening on MDR. And so adding in the context around other systems, so firewalls, security event logs, other security technology, other non-security technology, as it relates to activities that we see happening on the endpoint and allowing action to be taken, but having that better view of the broader environment. And again, just a reminder, I know we said this earlier, feel free to chime in with questions. We do have a Q&A up here. I can't guarantee that we're going to notice immediately if you do ask us a question, but please go ahead and do that, and hopefully either Neil or myself will see that and we'll flag it and give you a quick answer during the session. So walking through the history. History is always fun, and it's important when we start thinking about how some things have changed over the years. So as I said before, antivirus has been around since 1987. That predates the date of what we probably consider the start of the internet, which was the early 90s. And so we've had malware, we've had hackers, we've had malicious activity in the technology world for a very long time. The internet changed that quite a bit, right? It gave visibility and access, remote endpoints on a pretty much 24/7 basis from the bad guys, from anywhere in the world. And so we started seeing, an increase in the quality of AV technology and endpoint protection technology in the 2000s. And just as recently as 10 years ago, the rise of the early stage EDRs. So early stage EDRs started giving you the ability to take, to take some level of action, primarily isolation of a machine, right? Because that's an important aspect of being able to stop an attack quickly is when we see it happening, when we get the alert for it happening, hopefully we're watching and we can take that quick action. And then we started seeing a little bit more around the flag security related events that might not necessarily be signature based, right? So kind of anomaly detection. You started seeing some technologies that fell in the middle. I'm getting a note that says your voice is breaking in the middle. Hopefully that's not for everyone, and maybe it's just an internet connection there. I'm not sure how to resolve that.
It sounds good on my end, Paul.
Okay, good. So it might be someone's home internet service. Always fun when we're all working from home, right? We learn to adapt a bit on things like that. So active EDR is really where we started having more interaction, more activities. That's more of the advanced version of an EDR, things that we're seeing today. And then MDR, which we've talked about already, is really that wrapper around an EDR technology that gives us the 24/7 activities. Neil, I don't know, I'll pause for a second and give you a chance to chime in on any of this that I may have missed.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing that's really not showing from a history is the XDR, but that story is really being told today, and we're going to tell it as it relates to the history here as we move forward. So good look at the past for sure.
Absolutely. All right, so we have another polling question. Again, this is now your opportunity, if you missed the first one, to get a poll response in so that we can get your CPE credits. We know that everybody needs those. So antivirus is a modern endpoint technology that is the future. That should be really easy to answer. We're not trying to trick anyone with our polling questions. We just want to make sure you're still there.
Another softball here.
We'll get slightly harder, but we're really not trying to trick anyone. I will again wait for a minute here for that to fill in. In the meantime, I guess we can chat. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If you've already answered, feel free to chime in with some questions. I'm sure I can find a way to keep talking if I need to, but and just to give you, while you're doing that, go ahead, Neil.
I was just saying there was a comment about your voice breaking up. I didn't notice it necessarily, but
yeah, hopefully if that is still happening, hopefully it will address itself as maybe my kids stop using the Xbox quite as much as they do. I may have to send a communication internally out to stop the Xbox. All right, so we've got 74% responded. We'll assume that the other percentage, as I click this, maybe we'll get it. We have almost 100% said antivirus is not the technology of the future. We have one person that loves antivirus and feels confident. Maybe they work for an antivirus vendor that doesn't sell EDR. So, but yes, the answer to this question is that antivirus is an antiquated technology, at least from my view. I assume, Neil, you would agree that that is now something that, while lots of organizations still run it, it is not the most advanced feature set of endpoint technology.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that maybe is that it's important to learn from history, right? So to have a solution that has that capability to say, what's allowed, what's not, very binary approach to the market, I think is important to have incorporated in your solution, but certainly, not as foundational as it may be from a history perspective, it's not the most advanced to catch what really is the bad guy trying to evolve faster than what the technology can prevent. So And that really leads nicely into this next slide. Honestly, this is, if you're not familiar with the organization MITRE out there, of those that are listening, please go out and visit MITRE. It is a nonprofit organization funded by government, and very much considered the most agnostic approach to testing of security platforms, amongst other testing that they do, not only security platforms that they test, but just a really great organization. A little bit hard to decipher some of the results, so if you go out there, it's going to be a little confusing. We've tried to make it a little bit more simple to show the results, but as you can see, some of those legacy, even EDR platforms that were early in the game and didn't necessarily evolve in an effective way have struggled to keep up with the latest techniques. This 2022 evaluation was based off of recent ransomware activities that were seen in the wild, and the results are very telling as to what organizations are able to stop. And being a Cybereason employee, and this from our Cybereason marketing, it's not a surprise that we put ourselves at the top, but the reality is we won by merit, and that can be gleaned out of the results. But the important part is just to kind of understand, and I don't want to sit here and just say Cybereason is the best, but it certainly looks to be that we're playing with the largest players in the EDR/endpoint protection market, and into the future into XDR is really where the market is going. So as we talk more about that story, it'll become more apparent why some of the legacy vendors may not be the best solution to stick with and kind of rest on your laurels with. There's a lot of organizations out there still running these technologies, and there's still good base core elements to them in their legacy form. But just, the investment, the acquisitions that have happened with some of these vendors, and even the legacy of security challenges with some vendors that have evolved over the years, it's good to start looking at the top of this type of result to get your foundational choices in line to evaluate. So this, again, is very marketing centric from Cybereason, so I will apologize for that, but this is where I get most of my materials from. I've morphed this box set here just to be a little bit more focused on our partners like Mazars in the MDR space and XDR as we evolve. But really, this one just kind of gives you a good foundation as to an organization maybe going out to the market and saying, what is the market that is available? What should I be looking for? What should I build my RFP questions around? Those sorts of things are very important to kind of set a foundational approach to who you're even going to bring into your evaluation. So, of course, as you mentioned earlier, antivirus is legacy, but there is a next generation component that we've developed at Cybereason. Other organizations have as well. But really, it's taking advantage of the artificial intelligence, the machine learning that's really evolved into a usable technology as of late. Very subtly can be challenging if you don't train the algorithms properly, but we get a lot of accolades. We get awards from folks around our use of machine learning, and really have gotten comments from even the likes of some large media organizations saying that we're doing it differently than others. So really important to kind of analyze what that means when someone says next generation antivirus, and dig into those details and look at some of those reports to understand. And then, honestly, Cybereason started as an EDR company back in 2012, according to your, timeline. Our founders from the Israeli Defense Forces 8200 division, if you guys are familiar, super cool, red team type of nation state hackers, really transformed their vision from, trying to break into places to how do I keep people like me out, and had an EDR that sort of sat behind the scenes and said, what is slipping through the cracks with these traditional solutions? And it really just evolved from there into becoming a full endpoint protection stack so that it could replace the need for some of these old technologies. And really, that's the theme here, is to try and aggregate your security spend in a meaningful way. I've heard the term of changing ROI as opposed to return on investment, turning into a reduction on investment as you move yourself forward in the evolution of security and what the cloud brings to all technology, really. Having the ability to manage endpoints down to the level of isolation, as you spoke of earlier, and being able to react to security events all from a central console that you can access from anywhere. Pretty powerful stuff, regardless of what solution it is. We're all sort of playing in those spaces where we're taking advantage of the cloud, but making sure that it's foundationally has that EDR component. And then kind of moving, down the stack on the left-hand side, endpoint controls are important. It's lowering the threat landscape, right? If you can say USBs aren't accessible from these sets of machines, you're all of a sudden reducing your threat surface considerably. Same goes with, the personal firewalls that live on every endpoint. If you have specific use cases that you can lock down, of course, that landscape reduces. So making sure those features are in there, super important. Mobile protection, cloud workload protection, all very important on that left-hand side. And even we've gone so far at Cybereason to advance our capabilities in the deep forensic space, where we're incorporating artifacts of execution. If you're loading a sensor onto a new machine and don't know what it was doing before you got it, in a merger and acquisition or something like that, imagine the power to be able to look backwards in time and see what happened before you got there. Pretty powerful stuff, and helps to build a story that, what we strive to be as timid as I feel to say single pane of glass, because it's been something I've been chasing for the last 25 years in this industry. It's getting closer, right, with this centralized platform in the cloud, having the ability to ingest from all endpoints and even all the XDR endpoint log data that we'll talk about in a moment. Pretty powerful stuff. So, moving into that XDR conversation is very natural, right? You've got alert-centric systems deployed from the last 20 years of cybersecurity being something popular, whether it be, the traditional network security in the middle with firewalls and even, logging from switches and routers and wireless access points. They all have logs that can be sent into what we've traditionally, sent to the SIEM, right? And, morphing that so that it becomes synergized with an EDR platform that has full endpoint protection capabilities as well as response capabilities built in. Now your story starts to get real interesting, right? Taking that telemetry from the endpoint and synergizing that with the technology that's considered legacy but still foundational to a good security program, to be able to make a stronger decision on what you should do, whether you should virtually unplug that network cable. That back in the day when you and I, Paul, first started doing this type of stuff, we were telling users to unplug their network cable. That's not a need anymore, right? You can drop in like a ninja from sitting in your beach chair at the beach, right? So pretty awesome stuff to be able to make that decision to isolate a machine quickly based off of those traditional technologies as well as even new ones, right? The cloud has logs, AWS CloudTrail. There's Azure logs that you can send across from a platform perspective. All the resources that live in there are all important to get log data from and correlate the story. Identity providers, all workspaces, all these things are highly telling as to what's going on in the environment to corroborate your story to make effective change at the endpoint. And then I kind of call XDR a journey more than a product, in my opinion, in that it's use cases, outcomes that you're trying to derive from a specific environment. So, if you're in a position to have all this data and making decisions on how to affect the endpoint's, status in the ecosystem, what if you could start to affect that change out to the identity providers? What if you could change firewall rules right from all that same console and have an orchestration system that now can basically control your whole ecosystem of security? The vision is there and that journey is still ongoing, but these are the kind of things that Cybereason is dreaming of as well as producing as product part of their offering today. So pretty awesome stuff. And then as you move across to the right-hand side, it's all services. The scariest thing in security market today is that the talent is just, you're either at the bottom end of the spectrum or you're at the top end of the spectrum, and there's a big gap in how many people are available to even, fill that middle ground. So the tool is super important, the technology to work for you in a way that makes the top end guys more effective and efficient in a way that they can provide service to, you know, as many clients as will sign up for the service, right? We have in our MDR practice, and we have partners like you at Mazars that help us to augment the need in the market. But the reality is we can automate our tools in a way and get people effective enough to manage up to 200,000 endpoints per SOC seat. So, you know, those sorts of things were not possible early days. Now you can, you know, do those things very confidently with a high SLA, capability to satisfy the needs of reducing that mean time to respond or detect situations. So, you know, I'll pause there and kind of move into the SIEM SOC environment, unless there were any specific questions that were out there. I wasn't monitoring that.
Yeah, Neil, there's one question, and I'll read it to you. So what is the number of days of data that CyberReason EDR platform can store at a time? Also, can it integrate with any third-party products?
Sure. So by default, out of the box, it is 30 days for all data is sort of the best effort on, depending on how many logs and how many events are coming from each system and endpoint that has a sensor on it. And if it's considered suspicious or has been what we call associated with a malicious operation, it becomes stored for essentially up to a year by policy, but it tends to live on forever, especially if you have any requests to have that extended. So there's archive options. I think I actually have that on the slide there in the right-hand side there, extended archive options. So if your business has, you know, specific requirements around how long specific data gets held, that can certainly be added as a SKU. It's just essentially some archiving routines that we enable and have, you know, extra storage on the back end. Certainly on a slower set, so, you know, requesting something old is going to take some level of time, but you know, it's all possible. As you can see, we're partnered with Google, and you know, they're the biggest data lake on the planet, if not maybe the universe. We don't know. But you know, the reality is that those are all check boxes and upgrades on the back end that we can help to support, as long as there's, you know, dollars associated, of course. So integrate with other third-party products. Certainly, there's integrations with lots of different ecosystem partners out on our website. We should have some level of I can send out a link to that once I find it, but we certainly have a list of all the different elements. If there's a specific one that you're interested in diving into to some degree, maybe we can have an offline discussion to kind of dig into those. And there's certainly different levels of integration based off of each partner, depending on what you're talking about. But and that story evolves even more as we talk about in terms of the XDR pulling logs from those. So, you know, one would be in ServiceNow seems to come up quite a bit as a specific example. You know, there are integrations and applications specific to ServiceNow or you know, even Splunk. So there's lots of integration, and you know, happy to have that conversation, but I think it's bigger than today.
Great. Thanks, Neil, for jumping into that question. And thanks for covering a lot of where CyberReason is able to provide EDR services. Alongside of CyberReason, and there's some vendors that we talked about in here, and this is really a diagram that's kind of specific to Mazars services, because again, that's where my background is, and that's what I deliver. So we're going to talk a bit about this. But along the build out of endpoint technology, we talked about the timeline. We talked about the growth of that endpoint technology. SIEM and SOC services have been growing in their own same way. And so this diagram kind of shows you how data is collected from within our clients' environments into a SIEM platform. In this diagram, we're using Splunk Cloud as that SIEM platform. It could be, you know, historically, it could have been ArcSight a number of years ago. There may still be some ArcSight clients out there. It could be Logarithm. It could be Elastic. There's a whole variety of different technologies you could be feeding to, but they all work in a very similar manner, where you're taking lots of different endpoints of data, feeding them into a cloud-based or on-prem based big data or some kind of a data repository, and then analysis is being performed. And so, the data includes, endpoint protection, firewall, system log events, IDS, IPS, cloud services, and really endless other systems that you're collecting from in order to be able to see through advanced capabilities, evaluate the threats that might be happening due to either signatures that we talked about, signature-based activities on antivirus systems, but this is really similar where we've written content that looks for certain signature activity that might be happening in an environment that follows it might have been something that we knew as the way a malicious attack worked. It might be the way an attacker performs their activities. And we integrate that into technologies like threat feeds from dark web, threat research, honeypots, or other types of things that we have seen. And we're looking for things along the lines of, known malicious behavior, data exfiltration, heartbeats from systems out to infected external systems. So, if we're looking to catch ransomware as an example, we're looking for that heartbeat that might be running from an endpoint that was breached, or somehow somebody clicked a link to an incoming email, and we're trying to flag that and respond so that we can get as quickly as we can to the root of the issue. There's also analysis that gets performed around low and slow type attacks, right? So you've got lots of historical information. I can go back into those environments and I can perform searches against either less critical events that may, based on their volume, add up to something more critical. And so this is a great solution to show malicious activity after that malicious activity has happened. The challenge with this type of technology, and we deal with this every day, is it's very expensive. We're storing data likely for a year. The vendors selling a SIEM solution or a data management solution like Splunk, while a great solution, if it's only being used for security monitoring and threat analysis, it may be a very expensive way to do that because it's storing data for a lengthy period of time. You're paying per gig per day that you're ingesting. And in order to get good visibility in your environment, you need lots of data feeding in. And so, a mid-sized organization may be collecting as much as 100, 150 gigs of data per day, resulting in a pretty expensive license on this type of technology. The other complex or challenging problem is there's a lot of volume of data. So we just talked about needing lots of data to be able to correlate, to be able to translate what might be happening, to connect the dots of what's happening. And sometimes that results in that proverbial needle in the haystack. And, trying to find that needle in a stack of hay is hard. And so when I have a screen that's just running continuous events, it almost starts to look like the Matrix. For those of you that have seen either the modern remake or the old Matrix movies, the flow of numbers and just data in the screen and trying to figure out, hey, did that just say a 4? Did that say a 6? Did that say an 8? And it's really hard to make that determination. And so, it's of interest to note that many very high-profile data breaches, if we look all the way back in history of probably the largest profile that sort of triggered a lot of modern changes to cybersecurity are things like Target and Home Depot that happened, that's probably at this point 10 to 15 years ago, maybe less, I've lost track of time these days. But those big events and many breaches that have happened since, after the investigation occurs, it's been identified that majority of the time, the security-related event and the alert that came into some type of an operations function or piece of technology would have shown the malicious behavior that occurred before the really bad thing actually happened. The problem is that, as I described before, that needle in the haystack, many times that event gets closed because it's seen as a false positive because, security analysts are receiving 100 false positives for every single positive, and we're hoping that they're going to make the right decision. But with that volume of data, it's extremely difficult. And so it's important to recognize that while this is a good technology and it is still very valid, it is really the particular event that might be causing the issue. And I did get a question. It says, how the future look like with the cyber attack increased or decreased? So I think the way that I'd read that question is Do we think cyber attacks are increasing or decreasing? I think cyber attacks are significantly increasing, and I think that's part of the conversation we're having here today, is why we believe that we need to get better at the way that we're evaluating, the way that we're seeing and responding to the way a security event happens. And we need to get further forward into that cycle so that we can take action sooner before an event actually occurs, and we're looking at historical data and just using data like a SIEM for incident response. So we do have another question. So this is,
Sorry.
Thanks, Neil.
I was just agreeing with you there. And by the way, the target breach almost 10 years ago, surprisingly. I was like,
10 years ago.
5 years.
Yeah, as I said it, I was like 10, 15, I don't know. It feels like it's been yesterday, but a long time, I don't know. So we have another question here. This one's kind of fun as well. I think our answers, we tried to be a little silly, but what causes security operation analyst alert fatigue? We talked a little bit about the volume of data coming in, some of the crazy that comes in, but is it staying up too late? Is it too many false positives, too much pizza, too few events to investigate? And we'll give just a minute and maybe even answer a little bit more around that cyber attack question while you guys are doing that, because to me, that's a great question, right? I mean, I hear from a lot of our clients that, with modern technology, shouldn't we be able to stop these attacks? And shouldn't we be creating a world where people are attacking less, right? I mean, if we translate it to other types of attacks that were happening, let's call it 100 years ago, right? There was no technology-based attacks. Well, maybe there were on different types of technology. Maybe people were trying to break, encrypted communications or something along those lines, which I know they were because I've seen those devices in museums. But the reality is, people were robbing banks. People were, going with gunpoint into banks, and they still do that a little bit, but it's not done as much. And the reason it's not done as much is because we have cameras, we have armed guards, we have all kinds of reactionary actions that we've taken to make it more difficult, that we catch people more frequently. I think the industry that we're in cybersecurity is in the very early days, similar to when, the Cowboys or Indian attacks, or maybe the, people on horses were coming in and robbing a bank and taking off with money. And so I think we're in those days still. I don't know that we have perfected the technology. And I think you're going to see from Neil and I in a few slides where we think the future is headed, and in a way that we can get more ahead of these attacks and hopefully reduce the amount of attackers. But I'll tell you, as long as there is success, and today, just if I look at my own pen testing practice, I have a team of people that do pen testing against our clients. And if you're not familiar with penetration testing, that's us attempting to exploit like an attacker. The level of success is 100%. Every single client engagement, there is some level of attack success that happens by my team into a client environment. And until that number comes down from 100%, the attackers will continue to attack, and we'll see that continue to increase. So we're only at 63%. We're either putting people to sleep, or we're going to have to continue forward here. So get your questions in. You've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, click, gone. So the answer is too many false positive alerts to review. I like the answer, too few events to investigate, but in reality, that is not the case in today's world. So security operation analyst fatigue typically happens because of the fact that they have a massive volume of events of false positives. It gets very tiresome to respond to false positives, and it is very difficult to continue to find that one positive amongst the 100 falses. So how do we fix that? How do we get to a spot where, the fatigue is reduced and we actually have our SOC analysts performing the behavior that they're intended to perform? Well, you've got to reduce the number of threats, right? We've got to let me take it back. We're not reducing the number of threats. We're reducing the number of false positives in an attack. We're trying to get technology to get more real in what it's producing, and we're investigating less events. Well, EDR does do that, right? There is a significant reduction in the volume of alerts that come from an EDR technology than what comes from a SIEM with a SOAR, or a security orchestration platform, sitting on top. So think about merging, that convergence of the two, right? So this slide is really just kind of setting up the stage for what we're going to talk about for the rest of this session, which is the convergence of those two types of technologies. Looking at a signature-based alerting system, moving to anomaly detection, moving to bringing in log technology in order to give us a much better view into what's happening in today's world of XDR, gives us that full context of what's happening. It gives us the full visibility of the environment, of systems beyond the endpoint, so that we can piece together what might be happening as quickly as we possibly can. And we're going to jump to the next slide here. And so, SIEM alone, or SIEM is a primary after-the-fact alerting system that something bad has happened, right? And in order to get closer to the when did it really happen, or immediacy of it happening, the SIEM vendors, and we've done this just like a lot of other SIEM and SOC vendors have done this, we move more to what's called MITRE. So Neil talked about MITRE a minute ago as an organization that evaluated EDR technologies. Well, another thing that MITRE has done is they built a framework called the attack framework. That attack framework is basically figuring out, how do I, instead of reacting, so a reactionary type alert in a SIEM technology might be that we had too many logins and it was a brute force attack, that after a bunch of failed logins, it resulted in a successful login. Well, that says, hey, I might have just seen a password attack that was successful in the end, and that should alert me as a problem, right? Well, but the problem with that is that that's after the problem has already happened. That attacker has made it into the environment. They've actually taken an action, and they are now there, and they might be able to plant malware before I get a chance to do anything about it. Well, using MITRE as an attack framework, I'm able to say, well, I know what the malicious behavior looks like for trying to learn the environment, for trying to evaluate the environment, for really getting myself set up to be able to attack. Well, if I can trigger on those alerts on the SIEM, that gets me a lot closer. But it's still not the best answer. It's still not the way that we think is the right answer here. And so EDR, on the other hand, as Neil talked a good bit about before, brings you closer to that first point of attack, because what we see in about, and I'm not going to throw a percentage out, but it is a significant majority of attacks when you see research done every year. So things like the Verizon Threat Report or other vendors that are putting these reports out of what type of incidents happen and how did they occur, the vast majority of incidents begin at the endpoint, at people's machines. Well, the reason for that is it's very easy to send out a mass email or some type of a mass attack against endpoints that are either not patched as frequently because they're off the network and they're not pulling their patch, or because people just will click links. If you can send an email that's really well framed, a phishing attack, it's very successful on a percentage basis. You really only need a couple people or even one to click the link if you send out 1,000 emails. And so that level of success continues to have that as that point of attack. And so EDR brings us much closer to it because we're able to, one, hopefully see it, hopefully automated stop it. And if we can't automated stop it, we can quickly flag it and isolate that machine so that we can remove it from the attack vector and stop it more quickly. But that is still not the whole picture. And so as we start looking at that convergence, if we have an EDR technology with log collection, with the visibility to the rest of the environment, now we start having something that we can actually analyze from a threat perspective. And so kind of moving here, we keep talking about EDR, XDR, but we really haven't gotten into the nuts and bolts of what it really is. So XDR is that piece of technology that is using something kind of similar to what we talked about with SIEM, right? It's using a data lake, it's using some kind of data repository, and it is collecting data from both the endpoints, cloud workloads, email, network. It allows bi-directional communication. It may or may not interact with the SIEM and a SOAR platform. It may be able to stand alone. A lot of organizations may still want to have a SIEM, so that might make you feel like our title of this was deceiving, because we aren't necessarily replacing the SIEM and the SOC, but what we're doing is we're enhancing the SIEM and the SOC. And so we are finding a lot of use cases that we are able to save money for a client that doesn't have compliance mandates that say they have to collect data and store it for a year, or they have to have historical incident investigation capabilities with correlated searches. So we're able to build a model where we're able to do threat detection and analysis with an XDR platform, which may be an enhanced EDR organization, somebody like Neil's organization at Cybereason, but be able to use that piece of technology alone without having to invest in the SIEM and the SOC. But don't make the assumption that you can get rid of that, because that's not always the case. But that piece of technology allows us to much more thoroughly and quickly respond, give us better visibility to the overall environment, and thinking about it as having real-time log data access. So if I can now look at an endpoint technology that's giving me visibility to what's happening at the endpoint, but I can add in my firewall, well, in a case of something like a ransomware attack, that ransomware attack might be sourced, or that email might be sourced from a known malicious IP address. Well, that information comes from your firewall because I have that inbound communication of email being sent from some known malicious behavior, malicious actor. Well, the heartbeat out from that endpoint machine might be something that actually also goes through my firewall, or hits an IDS IPS piece of technology and flags some kind of an event there. Well, if I have visibility now to all of those pieces of communication alongside of some of my cloud workload communications as well, I have that real-time visibility to see the entire picture of what might be happening, and I can make a better decision more quickly based on that data. And I do see we have a couple questions. I'm not sure when they came in. I just popped in my screen on the left over here. How do we convince the management to move from legacy antivirus to EDR? How do we explain the return on equity or return on investment question? So, that's something that I think we've got to show this solution. We've got to talk a lot more about why the enhancement, why it's quicker to find issues, and why the bi-direction of communication makes things happen much more quickly. The other return on investment conversation is around the reduction in events. So if an organization has legacy antivirus and a SIEM, and they're collecting large volumes of data and they can't make quick decisions, and they have a lot of people involved in making those decisions in a manual manner, the return on investment happens very easily when we look at making automated decisions or reducing the amount of event data coming in so that the analyst is actually investigating more real events. So if I can reduce it from 100 falses for every one real down to 20 falses for every one real, well, that's a significant reduction in human labor and resources, and that can be a very good conversation for senior leadership to make investments. The next question is, can we identify or locate the place of the cyber attack? And so absolutely, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. If I look at the console inside of an EDR piece of technology, and Cybereason's a great example of that, they have visibility to endpoint data, and they will be able to show what attack happened based on the data that they have. An enhancement into an XDR platform, or an addition of additional log data into that platform in real-time analysis, gives a much better picture and be able to paint a real view of where an attack happened, how it happened, and what exactly occurred. That's been a dream of SIEM technology from the beginning, and I've never seen it come to fruition in a good, clean way. EDR is the first platform that has actually, in my view, been able to start painting that picture a lot better. And then there's one more here, and I'm going to have to keep moving on. Is there an option to isolate the endpoint automatically from the network in the case of any attack? So you can automatically take actions. I would not recommend doing that in the case of any attack, because you want to make some decisions. So you're going to have different priority associated with events, and there are some events that you may not want to take action on in an automated fashion. So we'd probably want to be a little careful there, but I'm happy to talk more through that later. So we've kind of built up to this, right? But XDR we view as the future. So the enhancement of visibility to better protect from ransomware, EDR did that. XDR does that even more. We have more visibility into what's coming in. We can paint the picture. We can write a better correlation rule. We can write a better analysis associated with the content of what does a ransomware attack look like from origination to its migration in the environment and lateral movement. And when we can define what that looks like, we can flag it both before it begins to be a problem, and then we can flag it again as it starts to grow in the environment. Hopefully we stopped it before that happens. we get a much better ability to see the full view of the potential attack. We talked a lot about that. We're much quicker to take action, hopefully have a lot less false positives coming in, a lot less manual interactions. In a security operations role, if I have an environment that has just an EDR versus a SIEM and SOC, SIEM and SOC is like tenfold on the number of man hours it takes to monitor an environment over an EDR. If I have an XDR option, it's even more significant in its reduction in manual labor and the amount of view that we have into the environment. Hopefully, as we reduce some of those costs associated with that manual labor, maybe even tools and technology, we can reinvest that into having a 24/7 monitoring function, whether that's in-house or whether it's a third party doing that work for you. That will improve that piece of technology. It'll improve that service tremendously. We can start doing threat hunting. If you're not doing threat hunting today, you are missing a major potential risk in your environment, because low and slow attacks are common. A lot of malware that we see in an environment, we still see the stats that it takes 255, I think 300 days-ish in order for the average organization to identify from the start of a potential attack to the time that they actually identify the data breach. Most organizations aren't identifying their own data breaches. They're identifying it when a bank or someone else calls them that says that, in a retail world, that they're a common point of purchase, or in some other world, the FBI calls them and tells them that they're seizing a server in order to do an investigation. That's the first they find out. Well, that is not the first time you want to know you have an attack. You need to shrink that window, and having a third party or having better monitoring services is the answer to that. So I'm going to jump into another poll question, because I think we've talked more than we expected to. So I've got to get poll number 4 question here. So how does XDR change the game? Slightly more complicated question, but I'll give you a second to answer this question. And hopefully nobody finds it that complicated, because I still don't think it is.
One thing while we wait here, Paul, I had one comment on Shabam's question around talking folks into the getting return on investment, right? It's an additional expense. Well, as you tell the story of XDR and the potential for not having to invest in those SIEM technologies or SOAR technologies, and even the support of those, all that complexity starts to go away with a true XDR platform that's driving towards outcomes as opposed to just compliance requirements and having legacy amounts of data for a year. That was a question that came up a little bit earlier. If the reasoning behind having the logs for a year is so that you can investigate back, because the fact of the matter was the mean time to detect was a year, not too long ago. But now we can shrink that window into minutes. Do you really need that log data forever? Certainly there's still going to be lagging industries that say yes, but the reality is that if you can identify all the attacks and thwart the attackers before they get anywhere, the logs become inconsequential. Just the actual attacks, being saved for a while and the evidence associated, not all the logs, right? So, arguably it's a reduction on investment as opposed to an actual investment over time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Neil. All right, we're going to jump forward just so that we can cover our last few slides and get a chance for some questions. I like that I had one answer of adds an X where there was an M. That is fact. That is not the best answer. Integrates log data with EDR and MDR is the correct answer. And so we've talked quite a bit about that, and I probably don't need to cover that anymore. And so I'm going to hand it back to Neil and talk a little bit more about MDR from Cybereason and kind of where we see that growing as a positive technology.
Yeah, thanks. And really, I think these last few slides I'll breeze through relatively quickly and just try and drive home the idea that ransomware is real. The statistics are alarming. There was a question earlier about, was it increasing? And by just the ransomware attacks alone have increased by nearly 100% over the last year, each year over year. So, it's not going away. It's ramping up. The world stage is not changing for the better as it relates to security. So, that's only going to increase. So you want to make sure that your solution is utilizing, and this slide in particular is digging a bit into the depth of what Cybereason solution is able to bring at the endpoint, to just kind of tell the story of how do I stop ransomware, right? That's the biggest topic in most boardrooms these days is what's my stance on ransomware? And there's a number of ways to thwart this, skin this cat, if you will, in that you can look at backup strategies and restore capabilities and making sure that if there's data encrypted and there's VSS snapshots to run back. But the reality is none of us want to be in that reactionary state. We want to stop it before it gets there. So, having all these layers to work with down to what we've evolved into at Cybereason, what we're calling predictive ransomware, is this idea that, you can apply artificial intelligence to the endpoint to understand what looks to be ransomware. So I'll kind of dig through this real quick. Like I said, we're running out of time a little bit. This was somewhat of a filler as an extra, but very relevant to likely everyone on the call is having some discussions around how to thwart ransomware. So we thought it was important. So again, making sure that each one of those layers, this is a depiction of, it's not just an encryption event that happens. There's lots of events that happen before it, whether it's a download of some malicious software that's trying to run a escalation of privileges or take passwords from legit accounts and using them across their environment. Those are all things that happen before a ransomware event actually happens. So there's lots of opportunity to stop them before that, and making sure that your solution has all those and not just a restore encrypted files capability, because that's really the end of the line. So that's kind of the depiction there, and really how we've worked to bring this to light, as opposed to what we had legacy done. And I think it was a very ingenious way of doing it. We planted canary files essentially in the operating system on the disk in different areas that typically get encrypted. What we've transformed into is this idea that all files are canary files. And if there's an event of any global file manipulation detected, then that becomes a ransomware event, and seems relatively easy on the outset, but there's lots of complex things going on behind the scenes to do that, but really taking advantage of that next generation technology specific to the ransomware problem, as opposed to just looking at it from a malware problem in general. So really awesome stuff, exciting in that regard. We've got marketing slides that say we're undefeated against ransomware. I hesitate to say those sorts of things just because it tempts the bad guys to come after us even more. But the reality is there are indications of in the wild in recent history that attackers shy away from Cybereason environments because of the technology that we've developed. So really cool stuff. This last slide here, specific to ransomware, is interesting in that it's brings to light that they're targeting more than just the local hard drive. They're looking at the network drives. They're looking at the cloud connected devices and repositories. So our technology focuses on that. Again, I would just challenge anyone that was out in the market trying to evaluate what solution to use, is to make sure that they're protecting their cloud resources as well as their network and endpoint. And this is that depiction, hard to see all the action on this slide, but is interesting in that it's all packed into one screen. This is that Shangri-La of single pane of glass that I described, to not only be able to see root cause and tools leverage and attack timelines all together in one screen to help make your life easier as an analyst, affected user machines, but also to be able to respond. If you can see in the top right corner, there's a respond button that basically puts you in a position to not only say, I'm going to respond to this one alert in some way, put notes in, whatever it might be, but to be able to isolate, and not only isolate the one machine, but if there's multiple machines, being able to isolate them or remediate them in an automatic way across the environment of all those machines. And then as that XDR story becomes more to light, all that you can actually see in this screen, there's an XDR enrichment associated all in the same screen. So now you're not just advantaging from the endpoint data, you're really taking advantage of all the data. And lastly, challenge your vendors as you talk about this story to make sure that you're getting all the telemetry back in. We strive hard not to filter any data at the endpoint, bring it all back for analysis in our graph database. So make sure you do so with your vendors that you may be talking to. So with that, I'll hand it back over to our mediator to ask questions. I guess, are there any questions left in the chat? I don't see any.
Yeah, there's one more in there, Neil. It's do you agree with AI monitoring in the system will help reduce false positive alerts and fatigue of the SOC analyst? And absolutely. I think the more you can get artificial intelligence and machine learning type activities, which we've seen a lot of in the SIEM market, automating, and we talked a lot about automating that beginning stage or responding more appropriately. So I look at AI as being some of that type of activity. So how do I flag a known positive, or how do I flag something that's different today than it's been in past days with a machine learning tech, or how do I then take and enhance my knowledge using something like a SOAR platform? All of those type of activities can help reduce false positives and reduce the fatigue for the SOC analyst.
Perfect. Thank you both. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation. If you've completed the CPE requirements, your certificate is now available for download. You'll see the instructions on the screen. If any of you have any trouble downloading, you can email me, olivia.collins@mazarsusa.com. I believe it was in your email when you registered as well, and I can help you get that. Mazars employees, you do not need to download the certificate. Excuse me, your attendance and credit have automatically been recorded today. We encourage you to tell us what you thought by completing the webcast feedback form, which you will be redirected to shortly, and it will also appear as a link here. Please take a minute to fill out once we conclude. Please feel free to reach out to me or to any of today's presenters with any questions. Thank you once again, and enjoy your day.